Hello everybody. Hi. Sorry about the delays, and to anyone watching on playback in the future, sorry you couldn't get onto the stream. Seems really strange talking into the future. Anyway, hello, I'm Joe Muggs. Hopefully some of you know my work, but to get to the point of what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to run through a bit of my work history, because it's what led me to the kind of understanding of the purpose of how artists present themselves and the relationship between artists and media and so on. So I've been a professional writer for 20 plus years, really, nearly 25 years. I've written for very mainstream and left field publications. You know, I'm kind of mainly known for writing about electronic and bass music, but I've covered everything. I've done world music, I've done pop stuff. Early on, I kind of thought I was going to take the mainstream route. I had a regular gig at the Daily Telegraph through a sequence of odd bits of luck, and was flying off to New York to interview Sean Paul and Cuba to meet one of us to Social Club and stuff, and then the combination of the collapse of the media industry and an awful lot of toxic things caused me to lose that job, and that kind of made me reassess and specialise and kind of focus on doing less paid but more interesting stuff for the likes of The Wire, where I was able to carve myself out a niche. And actually the way that the media has changed since then, I realised that this was the best thing that could have happened to me, and, you know, trying to climb the greasy pole along with all the trust fund kids who get the juicy jobs would have been a pretty painful thing. But because I'm now known for a particular thing that is my specialism, and which I kind of, you know, it's music that I've grown up with. Before I was ever a writer, I was in the music scene for quite a few years. It's put me in a fairly solid position, and because I've also had to hustle, I've been an eternal freelancer. I've done a lot of other jobs in the music industry. I've worked for distributors. I've put compilation albums together. I've been an occasional disastrous promoter, like a DJ. So I've seen the relationship of artists to the world from an awful lot of different angles. And one of the things that I've consistently done over the years has been I've done a lot of publicity material. I've written a lot of, especially biogs for bands. So in terms of how that looks, is usually a 2-page lengthy kind of description of the band or the artist and their life story and what they're all about, that goes out with the smaller, punchier press release for any given release. And I've done that for everyone from kind of one man and their dog, tiny cottage industry labels, new acts starting out. You know, from time to time I'll write for free for you know, some young artist who needs a kickstart. I've done all the way up to major label priority acts, big international DJs and stuff. I mean, I've just been doing some stuff with Damien Lazarus and Seth Troxler, and, you know, I've done the same process for people like Rasheen Murphy and Katie B. So people who've been around the block. So I've seen it again from lots of different angles, and bit by bit, I started to notice the same general principles: what's working, what's not working. I would get feedback from artists, and repeatedly people would come out of the biog interview saying, I feel like I just had a therapy session, and I kind of realised, okay, there's something slightly deeper going on than purely purely kind of writing a bit of publicity material. A lot of people were finding it got to something about them, or it helped them understand what they were about, and most importantly, it helped them understand the purpose of what they were doing with their music. So I started thinking about, you know, where I can go next with that, you know, just in order to create extra work for myself. And so in the last 5 or so years, I've also then built from that another layer of media training, which I do quite often with acts. So I do sessions like this. I've done various you know, activities with young people or with charities working with musicians and stuff, where I talk through the principles of it, but also as part of the service that I get paid for by bigger labels. I'll do the biog, and then I'll run through the kind of principles that I'm talking about today with them. So we'll get feedback from the artist about what they think of what I've written, and then we have a discussion. So it's like another sort of follow-up therapy session, as it were. So to get to the nut of what I think is really, really important for artists of every level, from, you know, from hobbyists, all the, well, no, not hobbyists. If you're a hobbyist, you don't really care what the world thinks, you know, you're making it for yourself. But the minute you kind of put your head above the parapet, the minute you're presenting stuff to the world, from that point all the way to people who've been around the block and have been at it for 20 or 30 years, doing yourself a biog, or doing a biog with someone like me, has a whole set of purposes. Most journalists don't even read it. That's one odd little secret. I mean, it's just a thing. Like the average music journalist probably already knows who you are, or can Google, or has spoken to the publicist, or you know, otherwise just doesn't need the biog. The biog that is read by the people that your average artists don't really think about that much, which is kind of local newspaper journalists, local website journalists, listings writers, all over the world. So it's actually kind of, it's outreach, it's going beyond your little thing. It's when you you end up in Canberra or Denver or Graz in Austria or whatever, it's probably, the phrases from it are going to be what appear on programmes or on festival listings or on local newspapers or whatever. And those things are absolutely as important as anything that any writer like me writes in a review or in a you know, feature about the scene that you're in or anything like that, because those are the things that are going to pop up on search results. So they echo through the internet. So you'll often, I've seen phrases that I've written or other people have written in biogs appearing years later because they just get reiterated. You know, someone will copy a listing from another listing. So these phrases that you use about yourself, or these kind of these tropes you create around yourself, the stories you tell about yourself, will echo through, you know, the endless caverns of the internet, and right, that's quite important. So, you know, the sooner you start, the sooner you set your intentions about who you want to be, how you want to be talked about, the better. The other thing is that whenever you do a bio, whenever you do the process of sitting down and saying, who am I, how do I want to be talked about, you're also creating a strategy document. And for a single person electronic producer, that might not seem as important as it is for, say, an Ed Sheeran with a huge team around them and an international marketing operation going on. But actually, for any creative project, if you're in it for the long term, clarity helps you hugely. I'm one of those people with a cluttered brain all the time. I'm always, working on 19 projects. I get exhausted. I get absolutely weighed down, stressed, fatigued because of the kind of like, have I done, or what was the thing for that? This constant. The more you have clarity on the core things that you're doing, so a sense of mission, a sense of boundaries, a sense of, okay, if I'm going into an unknown situation, I know how I'm going to act. The easier life is. It really is as simple as that. You just get a clearer head. So creating something for yourself, a strategy document, a mission statement, just a thing that says, this is me as an artist, this is me. It doesn't have to, you're not actually psychoanalyzing. The therapy thing is kind of, is a bit, there's an element of that to the process that I'm going to describe, but really you're separating off you as an artist, how much that is related to you as your inner life or not. You can make decisions about that, but by having clear lines, by having boundaries, by having bullet points, key things that you like to talk about, you're just creating space for yourself. You're putting those kind of like constant self interrogation things that creative people very often have running through their heads into its own box. And it also, it gives you an anchor, it gives you confidence when it comes to going out and communicating with the world. So if you're going to be doing interviews about your music, you might be very shy. Lots of musicians are. Lots of musicians are not necessarily particularly verbal people, which is why they make music. They find it easier to express complex ideas, in that other way. And that's completely legit and it's fine. And but, if you are going to present your music to the world, it's saying, I just want to let the music do the talking, generally doesn't cut it. There's some exceptions. I'll talk about those in a minute. But on the other side, lots of musicians are also very talkative. They're very social. But in that case, you can find yourself kind of splurging all over the place. You can say things that you might not have wanted to, or you can contradict yourself, or you can start creating narratives that end up being harmful to you, whatever. So in either case, this process of taking a little time to define who you are in the creative world, in the, who your public self is, will just give you that little bit of extra confidence that you're not going to say too little if that's the type of person you are, or you're not going to say too much or say the wrong things. So, I recommend to any creative person. I mean, this applies. I increasingly do this outside of music as well, because I do copywriting from time to time. I work for corporate companies or people in startups, and the same applies to CEOs of companies. The same applies to anyone who's a freelancer and has a personal brand. I hate using this kind of corporate language, but it amounts to the same thing. This like creation of something that you can hold up and go, this is me, this is the me that I'm happy sharing in the world. So I recommend to anyone in that situation that you take some time. This is probably a day. This is about a day's worth of time to go through what I do with an artist when I write their bio, and that is to try and record everything about yourself fairly unfiltered. So, obviously when I'm employed to write a bio for someone, because I'm under contract to them, the record company's paying me, they can trust me, they can say anything they want, we can talk about their life story, and I'm not there as a journalist, I'm not going to share anything untoward, so they can kind of splurge, they can just kind of, it's a conversation, it's a lengthy conversation. If possible, we'll spend 2 hours in conversation. If you're doing it yourself, you can talk to your phone, you can just sit down and talk, or I always recommend just sitting down with your best friend, sitting down with someone that you absolutely trust over a bottle of wine or a pot of tea or whatever, in whatever situation you're most relaxed and chilled, because it does help to have someone prompting you. So try and tell your life story. Literally start from birth. What hospital you were born in, what town you grew up in, the tiny details. And it's absolutely vital to understand that the things that you think are boring, other people will not. No matter how ordinary you think you are, the minutiae of your life are something that no one else has experienced. A lot of the time I'll speak to musicians who come from small English towns, and they'll go, oh yeah, it was just standard. I try and get them to talk about, tell me something funny from your school years. Who was the weirdest teacher, or who was the who was the school bully, whatever. And the details of those stories are always something that pop out. There's always some flavour. And if people talk about their family, whether your family background is Scottish or Nigerian or Welsh or Kuwaiti or whatever, there are fine details in that. So you talk about the family, you just like talk about the home, what were the sounds, the sights, was it a noisy house? Was it a noisy house is always a good question, because that really brings out stuff about the cultural background. And yeah, just like run through bit by bit, almost year by year, your childhood and the things that brought you towards the point where you started interacting with culture, subculture and music. And at each of those points, if there's music involved, if there's culture involved, really try and pull out what was the first thing that made your heart sing, what was the first thing that made you dance is always a good one. Try and bring out things, again, like describing your home life, it's like always bring out things that have sense memories. That's a really good one. It's like try and put yourself in your head the first time you heard a song on the radio that made you go woohoo, or the first time that you and your friends heard a song that you felt was yours, as opposed to like something that's pop or something that belonged to your parents or whatever. What was the first song that bonded you and your friends together? What was the first song that made you cry? Whatever. Each of those things, if you come to a point where you're kind of, there's a bit in your story where you're engaging with culture, again, close your eyes, try and think about what were the sounds, sights, smells that were happening. What was the room you were in? Or was it in a car? Or what were the physical sensations you had? Because that will help you pick. Those are the things that really tell people about who you are as a musician. And those tiny little, just one or two sense memories will bring that to life for someone who's going to read it in the future. And yeah, that's the process, the initial kind of splurge. And if there is stuff that is painful for you or that might be controversial, whether it relates to religion or sexuality or family dysfunction or any of that, you know, this is why you want to be in a safe space, this is why you want to be with a good friend or whatever, you know, try and say it, try and get it down. You can always destroy the recordings afterwards, but, you know, try and get the full breadth of your life. Because again, these are things that if you can talk about them, are going to grab people's interest. They are going to tell people a lot about you and your creative process as well. And then filter. Then you sit down either on your own or again with a trusted friend and start kind of cross-referencing the story that you've just told with the kind of more rational sense of who you want to be as an artist. You may already have a clear kind of idea. You may have a kind of Detroit techno influence, like, I want to be a kind of cold professorial futurist kind of figure, or you may be ready to present yourself as quite an emo person, or you might be a very politically motivated person, and you look through your story and you kind of go, right, boundaries, 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 boundaries. What will I not talk about? Put those to one side. You know, what are the subjects that are off limits, and what are the things that I want to super emphasize? So, you know, you get yourself. You don't have to make lists necessarily, but in your head, just you'll start seeing shapes, you know, story shapes, as it were, emerging. You'll start to see your narrative emerging, and then try and write it down. And there's some very, very basic. Writing is both easier and harder than people think. Paradoxically, I mean, it is hard. It takes years of writing. You know, almost no one is a natural writer. It takes a lot of doing, but some of the hard-earned lessons that take a lot of people a long time to do are actually quite simple, and they are just say what you see. Don't try and be a writer. Try and say things in the simplest possible language. I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this. Don't use phrases like sophomore album or I'm trying to think about it. Avoid loads of adjectives. Avoid, like, you know, curly kind of fancy terminology for anything. Just kind of try and be as deadpan and straightforward. Write down your life story, as much or as little as you want to tell, and then read it out loud. And this is a really awkward one, and this is something that kind of takes, you know, it may take a drink or two, or it may just like take a few runs through, or whatever. But if it's a general rule for writing, if you can't say it, don't write it. If it doesn't sound natural coming out of your own mouth, then no one's going to really believe it on the page. And that's the fundamentals, really, of writing the bio. That's the process. During this, you may kind of go, this isn't working for me, or my artistic drive or my personality type makes me feel that I should be doing something different to this. And it is okay to completely throw away the process or subvert the process. There is room for a burial in this world. There is room for someone who never speaks to the media and keeps hidden. There's room for the Beastie Boys, as another example I always give. The Beastie Boys always used to just lie all the time in their interviews. Aphex Twin lies all the time. Everything is complete self-mythologization and, I think the Beastie Boys claimed they recorded Paul's Boutique in the original 1960s Batcave from 1960s Batman. I just thought that was, I remember as a 15-year-old, that was just the greatest thing I'd ever heard, and I knew they were lying. But it was just like, yes, this is fantastic. I love these people. But so if you have severe anxiety, for example, and you realise that you do not want to do the publicity process, I think it's still valuable to do this, to run through it with yourself, to actually go through the nuts and bolts process of trying to tell your story to yourself or a friend, and you may actually find that you can, and if you can, it's better to engage than not to engage, because not engaging is a whole lot more work long term, and also creates more intrigue, and you may find that the attention on you is even more intense if you reach a level of success and are secretive. So it's, again, as I said at the beginning, it's about clarity. It's about kind of condensing stuff, because otherwise, as a creative person and as a person who's hopefully going to get attention from the outside world, there's going to be so much running through your head as people's attention comes on you. That clarity, that sense of, all right, I've tried this, I don't think I can talk about any of this, is then a conscious decision, and it's a conscious decision that you've made with X number of justifications, so you can feel slightly firmer in your decision to not do publicity, because you've talked through to yourself about why you wouldn't. If you want to be creative and self-mythologizing, to do that either humorously lying about yourself, or doing a art project, if you're Drexciya or someone, you're the Wu-Tang Clan talking about monasteries and all the rest of it. Again, you have a basis, so even if you build your actual publicity material is fantastical and part of your art project, and you're never actually going to say anything about your upbringing in Reading or wherever it was, at least you've got a foundation, and you've got that basis, you've got those lines drawn. So yeah, I think those are the fundamentals. And like I say, it echoes through. The media is such a complicated space. I've come, in my time writing, I've come from the very, very end. I think I got a little taste of the old school media, as it were. I was doing some bits and bobs of magazine work right at the end of the 90s, and I started properly professionally writing in about 2001, and that was, it was last days of Rome. There was a lot of, it was the last time when there was really money flowing around newspapers and magazines in any serious way, before, the information becoming free destroyed everything. And I just got a hint of what it must have been like in the days when the NME could make or break, or Mixmag could make or break, or that was crucial. Nowadays, everything is much more distributed. Obviously, a resident advisor feature will do great things for you. There are plenty of music magazines that have cachet, that have power. A Guardian article, a Times article, whatever, will, in like actual fundamental financial way, will sell you some downloads, they will sell you some tickets, all the rest of it. But the bigger picture is this kind of distributed kind of information flux, and that is why I think it's super important to have ownership, because you're going to be surrounded. Your information is going to be out there, and it's going to be ping-ponging around the universe. And the more that you have had that moment, had that little time of going, well, I know what I like and I know what I don't like. I know the things that might be said that I want to counter, or I know how to kind of draw a clear line saying, no, I'm not going to talk about that, or whatever. You're not going to ever have power over how you're presented, but you can steer a course, I guess, is the way to describe it. So, I hope that helps. And does anyone have any questions?
What advice do you have for an artist that's trying to construct an artist identity that's a bit distinct from who they are as a person?
What advice would I give someone who's trying to create an artist identity that's distinct from them as a person? Still do the thing, still do the conversation about yourself. I guess maybe you would even do it twice. You would kind of almost have the conversation about yourself in your safe space. Like I say, you lock it away. You can destroy the recordings, whatever. Have the conversation as the artist, with your kind of manifesto writing head. Write manifestos is always good. It's like, be bold, make a big statement. Say, I am Janelle Monáe, I am an android, kind of stuff. And then have them side by side. See how they work. See whether one of them. This is where the kind of psychoanalytic or self-analysis, I guess is a better way of putting it, thing comes in, because you may notice that something within your artist manifesto is amplifying a part of yourself that you hadn't kind of realised was feeding into it, whatever. You may realise that it's overcompensating for something or whatever. So it will just tell you something about why you're doing what you're doing. It's difficult to say more, because obviously those approaches have to be super individual. They have to be something that you're going to commit to. So you've got to think about, well, am I going to commit to this kind of for the life of this artistic project, or is this an iteration? When am I going to want to shift this? When am I going to want to change? You don't have to stick to any plans, because life is unpredictable. But the more rooted it is in who you are, the more convincing it's going to be, the more depth there will be to it, even if you never actually mention that personal stuff.
Thank you.
Have you ever encountered an example of an artist who has reclaimed or sort of directed a big sea change in their media narrative midway through their career, and managed to steer the boat in a completely different direction?
Have I ever encountered someone who has created a sea change in the way they're perceived as an artist? That is a really interesting question. You know, there've been obviously there've been classic big names. You know, Madonna was so skilled at that. Prince was skilled at that. David Bowie was famous for it. I'm trying to think, because we're kind of, you know, it's Rye Wax and we're in the electronic music world, if there's someone who that applies to. I mean, I've done a bit of work with Roisin Murphy. She's a great example. She has done that several times, and she is. I mean, she's kind of really a Bowie or a Prince or a Grace Jones. Really, she does it. Her whole life is a series of artistic personas, very, very complicatedly woven into her real life. But the way that she came back after motherhood and, you know, really went, I'm just going to do my albums as complete art projects, completely avoid obvious club music kind of stuff. And present and the way she's managed to go on, you know, right through, you know, being a woman older than the usual pop star, you know, each time every project she's addressed who she is, and she's kind of, which I recommend, you know, again, every new project you can kind of do the process again. Everyone should really. Plaid might be an interesting example, actually, because they were the Black Dog originally, very, very mystical, very, you know, kind of keeping their personalities out of it. And just step by step, it's not been a sea change in that sense, but step by step, they've kind of brought themselves and their politics and their personalities closer to the surface. And I think, you know, they're both very introspective, thoughtful, articulate kind of guys, and I think that's been conscious. I think each time they've sat down and gone, you know, what's this project, what are we doing? So even though people think, oh, it's Plaid, you know, they've done 25 albums or whatever that just sound like Plaid, actually the evolution when you go through their career has been really interesting. I'm going to ponder that one. I'll put something on the notes when they put the video up, because that is a really, really interesting question.
I had a different question, but just to follow up from that question, because it is interesting. Do you think then, like, it's very possible to change your narrative, or do you think that, like, once you kind of commit in the start, you're tied to that? You know?
Is it possible to change your narrative, or are you tied to what you are landed with or what you created at the start? It does change. So it's a little of column A and a little of column B. Your narrative does change over time as an artist. Very, very few people, unless you're kind of very straight down the line, you know, you're Tiesto or something and it's just bangers, 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 or, you know, I am, or you're really kind of powerful, very distinctive, funny personality like Scratcher or someone like that, then, you know, you kind of plough your way through single course. For anyone else, narrative does change. So whether it's possible to control that is always the most difficult question in the world. I mean, you know, we're into freedom of choice versus destiny here. It is so. There may be key moments where decisions that you make, even one word, right or wrong, changes everything. At other times, you can like hammer away at a narrative and slowly push things the way you want. Yeah, every case is different, and there's no way of knowing what's going to work. This is why I kind of give the same advice, which is, you know, repeat the process define to yourself who you are, because it may really help you. It may get you the results you want, as it were, out in the real world, whether that's selling more records or being considered in a particular way. But most important of all, it gives you a kind of confident space, a place to manoeuvre from, so you can react to those unpredictable circumstances better. So, quite a vague answer.
Do you recommend it, like changing your narrative, or do you think it's better to stick to one thing and just like go for what, you know?
Do I recommend changing a narrative, or is it better to stick to one thing? That is 100% down to the combination of you and your circumstances. It really, and that's part of, again, of the reason for doing the process of self-interrogation and stopping and saying, what's my story now? You know, why am I here? What am I doing? Is because it will give you insight into whether it's a good idea to do something dramatic. You know, are you one of those artists who is a sort of total art worker, a Rasheen Murphy, who the fashion and the art and the clothes and the storytelling and everything is all sort of part and parcel of the same thing, in which case, you know, absolutely, it's part of the process to reinvent, and it's like, you know, telling your story in a different way is like writing a new set of lyrics, whatever, you know. Has your life just changed dramatically? You know, has something wild happened or life-changing happened? In which case, yes, you're a different person. So yes, you want to tell a different story about yourself. So yeah, it really depends about how you feel about where you are, how you feel about where you want to go, who you are, what your artistic project is. So many variables. But again, sitting down, talking to yourself or talking to a friend or talking to a trusted manager or colleague or bandmate or whatever. Talking of bandmates, actually, this is one thing I was going to mention early on. If you're in a collaborative project, this kind of clarity thing becomes doubly, triply important. It's the same as like doing royalty splits. Sit down, work things out. Say, who am I, what's my role, what's the plans for this project, what's the level of commitment, why are we doing this, what are our different personalities, what are our different tastes, can save so much trauma later on. You know, bands fall apart because they didn't say, you know, who's contributing what 20 years earlier, and the bitterness from that kind of vagueness. So easy as a musician to think that things run on vibes, and that you can just kind of, you know, we're just feeling our way into it, you know, we're just, you know, we're everything's natural, everything flows. But yeah, creating clarity, if you're part of a wider group or scene or collective or whatever it is, the more you know about yourself, the more you know about, you know, each other, the more pain you will avoid. Yeah.
You didn't have another question.
I don't know if it's unrelated. You go ahead.
Okay.
All right. I've done this process with people in the that either are very new or in I guess the 2010s digital. A lot of styles are kind of combined. We live in a hybrid. That's where we are right now.
Yeah.
Something that I struggle with sometimes in terms of language is to not have things sound very pretentious in a sense in terms of forefront, combination of genres. How do you avoid writing things in between things that people do understand without just listing accolade or just listing genres?
Yeah, you've really hit on something that occupies my brain an awful lot as a reviewer as well. So the question is, because, since probably 2010 or so, we're in a time that's almost post-genre, or rather, genres are in flux constantly, and we no longer have the kind of delineation of scenes like in the past. So how does an artist talk about their sound and their musical personality in a way that is comprehensible to Joe Public, and doesn't sound pretentious? And for me personally as a reviewer, my answer to that is that I do it a lot. I just, I have to write, I have to review 20, 30 records every single month, between Bandcamp and The Wire and the other different things I do, and the album reviews and so on. So it's almost unconscious to me. It's a mechanical process to me. I just have to. It's practice, and it comes back to that say what you see principle. It's like, what does this sound like, and how can I describe it in the most conversational terms? It's just like thinking about how you would talk about a record you're excited about to a friend at the pub kind of helps. Talking about the material nature of it. So, if there is a particular instrument, tone, placement of a kick drum, something like that defines the style. It's like, you'll get it over much better if you say that something has a gigantic bass, or a huge kick drum on the one, or no distortion, clean tones, and that those kind of things that just kind of will ping someone's, again, sense experiences. That helps. Energy, you talk about energy levels, you talk about is it cerebral music or is it kind of bodily music, what are the effects that you want the music to have on people, is it, is simplicity, is it varied or is it consistent in its tone and tempo and that kind of thing. This question about where genre is now is it's endlessly baffling, and I don't think it's been dug into. So it is a struggle for all of us who talk about music to get to that point. So I'm really sorry I can't give an easy answer. Think about crowds, think about people, think about how people hear music, what they're feeling, what they're reacting to, and then try and pull some sort of simple feelings, descriptions of movement, descriptions of sonic experience, I guess, from that. And it's okay to use overarching terms like rave music or noise music or whatever, and you can say, in the flux of genres, it kind of sits a bit, you can say it sits between so-and-so and so-and-so, but yeah, it's a tough one.
Alright, thank you.
You had another question?
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you have any advice or opinions about constructing a narrative through video or video interview?
Do I have any advice or opinions about using video to construct your narrative? It's good. It's very good. I do it myself a little bit. I don't have a huge amount of experience. I was actually having a conversation with another journalist this morning about the value of this in terms of biogs and publicity material, because Sean Adams, who runs Drown on Sound, also runs a consultancy, and he works with a lot of bigger artists than I tend to. He works with major label ones who have international teams, And he's suggested to labels that actually they should be recording their bio interviews on video and then sharing the key moments in it, like do a little edit, press pack type thing, and share those moments with, you know, the international team so that everyone's on the same page. That sounded like an eminently sensible suggestion to me. I think people will grasp who you are if you're happy in front of a camera. People will get a very good idea of, a much better idea than even from reading. So yeah, if you want to present your ideas as a video podcast, or I mean, the same goes for audio as well. You know, if you're a natural speaker, doing little audio clips, doing your own kind of mini podcast via your website, or doing, you know, just leaving voice notes on a Instagram or something, gives people windows into who you are. Yeah, absolutely. Use audio and visual materials to present yourself. Very definitely, yeah.
In terms of reinvention again, where do you see aliases, as in like separate monikers for the same person, the same artist operating under different aliases in all this?
Where do I see aliases, artistic aliases, and the purpose of them? Yes, yeah, they're great. Yeah, it's you know, another one of those things that hopefully will come out of the process of talking to yourself about who you are. You know, if you've used an alias, or if you've created like two very different types of music, the question will probably arise in your mind anyway. So, you know, you should be talking to yourself about, like, why do I do these two different things? And hopefully, you know, during that process, it will become clear to you whether they are things that you could tie together as part of a project, or whether you feel that they should be aliases. Some people do aliases for completely commercial reasons. You know, there's quite a few underground producers who are secretly tonking out the cheesy tech house under other aliases. Yeah, it has huge value for, but it may be for many different reasons. So, you know, some people just do it for fun, some people for artistic reasons, some people for commercial reasons. So again, just, you know, ask yourself, be honest with yourself, ask yourself the question of why you're doing that, because the more you do that, the more you've got a sense of mission and clarity about how it relates to you as a person, then the more convincing the process will be, and the more committed you'll be to it. Right. Oh, we do have another question. Okay.
Yeah, just to say, I guess for a lot of musicians, in the way things are, a lot of people do a lot of different things. So you might have your main artist project that, you know, you're talking about, or an artist might, but then I guess they might also have lots of other things that are related to it. The risk here is this, I guess there's always a question of how much of that to kind of include, because there's a risk of overload of information versus sort of not. I don't know, do you have any thoughts on kind of streamlining or not?
Yeah, okay. So the question is, it's very common for artists to have multiple projects, overlapping things with other people, work in lots of different fields. So when you're talking about publicity material here specifically, or so how much do you narrow that down when you're talking about individual projects? Horses for courses again, I'm afraid, basically. I mean, straight away, the artist that sprung to mind was Shabaka Hutchings. You know, he's everywhere. He's on everything. He's working with a million different people. He's across underground electronic, experimental rock, and of course jazz everywhere, and spiritual Japanese flute music and stuff. I think it depends what your role is in the project that you're specifically talking about, and the context. Like, for example, if you were doing something that's specifically, I don't know, deep house, aimed at deep house DJs, they're the sort of people who just like want to mainly focus on the music, and you would talk just, you know, you just narrow it down to focus on things that are relevant to your relationship to that scene or your credentials for that scene or whatever. If you're doing something that, it just 100% depends on who the people that you're likely to be talking to are going to be impressed by. For a central artist, well, you obviously want to show your versatility. You know, you should say he's done everything from X to Y to A to B. If the project is more focused, if it's aimed at a particular set of people, then speak to them. It's again, it's about boiling it down to who am I speaking to. So just think in the simplest possible terms, and we'll go from there.
I do have another question. Sorry about all my questions.
All good.
As a consumer, I find anonymous projects very intriguing, and I definitely feel like they draw me into the music and into wondering about the artist, and just generally more curious about it than if an artist is there on plain paper, press shot, where they were born, what their life experience was. What are your thoughts on that?
So the question is, what are the thoughts on the intriguingness of anonymous artist projects? And I feel like nowadays it has to be done with intent. I mean, I'm old enough to have, my kind of musical coming of age was right in the kind of aftermath of Acid House, and so the thrill of white labels with nothing written on them, or just a phone number in Doncaster or something, it was just was part of the. It was a specific part of the culture. It's like hearing something on a mixtape and spending years trying to track it down. That kind of not having any. I don't think I knew Underground Resistance were black for X number of years. I remember having this conversation with someone else of my age, and it was like, yeah, I thought they were German. That sense of mystery and something that, like you say, draws you in, draws the listener and the fan in, is fantastic, and has real value, not just for the project but for the wider culture, for the kind of knitting together of mythology and like multiple people's kind of personal commitment, all putting energy into that specific culture. You still got to sell your record. You still got to like get it out there. So you have to. Again, it's about intentionality. It's about kind of how am I going to do it then? Am I going to focus on? Is there going to be a visual? Is there going to be a cool visual? Is there going to be a story? Because even Burial, anonymous though he may be, has a whole visual identity. Has this whole kind of the sonics of the songs connecting with the picture of the coffee cup on the table and all that kind of thing, and all the song titles and everything tell a story. So it's like, all right, what is the story of this musical, this project? If it's not me, I guess is the short answer.
Just as an extension of that question, I've got a lot of friends who are into that very willfully obscure, mysterious artist persona thing. And they're very intently going for that nowadays, as you advise. But I feel like a kind of flip side of that is that they end up almost living that narrative. Like their story, their kind of mysterious story begins to infect their day-to-day lives. And they're kind of they end up adopting this sort of aloof, cold persona that isn't them. There's a particular club in South London, which I won't name the name of, but it's got a very aloof vibe to it, because everyone there is trying to do that. How do you avoid that, or what advice would you give to an artist who's trying to avoid their narrative infect per day to day.
I absolutely love this. I'm kind of like, there's a science fiction film writing itself in my head now. People getting infected with this mind virus of anonymity. So the question is if people get really into this kind of this electronic-y anonymity as a virtue, it creates a weird kind of aloofness of persona. People kind of actually change as people. And how should that be avoided? Well, the thing is, you might not want to. They might be really happy. You know, they might be absolutely vibing in their weird Androidy kind of you know, clean lines, electronic-y, personality-free world. A wider point. Subculture does change the person you are. You know, you look back at the punks spitting at each other in 1976 or whatever, you know, you look at, you know, becoming a raver, becoming somewhat, you know, committing the hours to the culture that you are obsessed with or love or are addicted to or whatever. It changes the way you walk, it changes the way you move, it changes the way you dress, it changes the way that you present yourself, it changes your brain cells. You're rewiring your brain all the time. Your brain is wired into the subculture that you're part of. So, I guess, again, that's why it's... You know, I feel like I'm one of these self-help gurus selling a method in now. But, you know, it does again come down to why it's good to stop, assess yourself, assess what your belief in what you're doing is, what your commitment to it is, why you do it, all of those things. Because, you know, you may fall accidentally into an artistic persona that takes you over like some sort of possessing spirit or whatever, and that might be good. But it's probably better to know what you're doing. Okay, we all good?
Yeah, thank you.
Right, wicked. Well, thank you, Rye Wax. Thank you guys for coming. Well,
I'll put a bit ASAP.
Ace, and good luck with all the rest of it.